Ian, I just want to get your view on where we are in terms of Middle East tension at the moment. How confident are you that the risk of an escalated conflict between Iran and Israel has receded for now? And are we sort of back to that situation normal of just a simmering proxy war?
Yes and no. Last week's crisis is over between Israel and Iran. We're not about to see another major tit-for-tat strike by either side directly against the other. That was, of course, a concern of the markets a week ago. But this has not contained the broader war. The Americans at this point continue to expect, despite their ultimatum to the Israelis against this, that there will be a ground incursion in Rafah in the coming weeks, with over 1 million Palestinians sheltering there. That comes against the backdrop of a proxy war, with Iran leading the so-called axis of resistance, terrorist organizations that do not respect the right of Israel to exist, and they are engaging in strikes in the Red Sea, engaging in strikes against American, British, and other military targets in the region. This is still a very, very dangerous environment, and there's no broader ability to bring that war to an end.
Yeah, on the subject of the Rafah incursion, how close do you gauge Israel to being to its goal, or its stated goal, of eliminating Hamas? And is it realistic? And if it succeeds, what happens next?
You'll remember that in the early days after the October 7th terrorist attacks, that President Biden said that Israel needed to learn the lesson of 9/11. That the United States didn't just take out bin Laden, didn't just take out al-Qaeda, but attempted much broader wars against terror. Has the United States succeeded 20 years later in winning a war against terror? No one would say that. How about the Taliban? Well, they're back in Afghanistan. I think we're going to have a similar conversation about Hamas. Hamas itself may be destroyed as an organization, but if they are, they will be replaced by other militant organizations that have the same political ambitions, not to mention the fact that Palestinians are much more radicalized in both Gaza and the West Bank on the back of the violence that we've seen over the last 6 months. So I fear, as much as I have great sympathy for the Israeli people in wanting to ensure that they can defend themselves and their children, and that you don't have a government that is run by a terrorist organization that wants to wipe them out, I think that the way that they have gone about that war has ultimately made them less secure and will ultimately make their enemies stronger, both in Gaza and more broadly.
So then, what are the odds of a ceasefire developing, and would there be any sort of timeline on that, given that you do have hardline approach on both sides?
Well, there was an effort to get a temporary ceasefire that many hoped could lead to a longer ceasefire if you had gotten many of these hostages that continued to be held by Hamas, civilian hostages, many of them in Gaza, left free. And of course, that hasn't happened, and it doesn't look close to happening. And absent that, I don't see a ceasefire from Israel occurring. I also don't see a ceasefire with this Israeli war cabinet as long as you have thousands and thousands of Hamas fighters on the ground in Gaza. Now, that may be working at counter purposes to their long-term stability, but this is not just a matter of the Israeli prime minister. The entire war cabinet believes that they have a lot more to do militarily in Gaza before they can declare mission accomplished, if you will. Not only that, but there's also the Hezbollah issue. The Israelis have evacuated almost 100,000 Jews from the north of Israel because they believe that they are not adequately defended and secure from rocket attacks that come from Hezbollah. If the Israelis do not in some way engage militarily against Hezbollah, to ensure that that safety. Well, how are they supposed to announce that these people are going to come back? So that they've gotten themselves in a bit of a bind. It's very hard to see how they declare victory either in Gaza or with Hezbollah in the foreseeable future right now. It's really hard to see.
Do you think that, because it's clearly a conflict that's not just a couple of parties, there's so many different actors that are involved at this point, do you think that that Israel, but also most notably the US, sort of underestimated the amount of cooperation and collaboration you would see between Iran, between China, between Russia, between North Korea in this conflict, and also what's happening in Ukraine, that you just have these separate axes that are operating?
I don't think that there is a significant amount of help or support that is going to Iran in this war. Certainly, Russia and North Korea are very simpatico with Iran, and there's a lot of trade going on. There's technology that is being transferred. But I wouldn't say that Iran has had any greater success in this war on the back of those relations. I take exception to including China in that grouping, as you have. I know that some have done that. But when I look at Russia, Iran, and North Korea, I see three states that are considered rogues. They're pariahs for the United States and its allies. No meaningful diplomatic or economic relations with those countries. And all three of those countries are led by people who believe that chaos in the international order is to their advantage. China does not believe that. China recognizes they need a level of stability in the global order, including in the United States, to be successful and more powerful over time. Now, China is a friend of Russia. China certainly gets a lot of energy from Iran. They trade a lot with these countries. But they are not rooting for these wars to get worse. In fact, China would much rather see a ceasefire in Ukraine. China would much rather see a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, where the Russians don't want that at all. The Russians want to see it all burn. And that is a much more dangerous position, especially for a country that is systemically important in their energy and other resource exports, as well as, of course, with their offensive cyber capabilities, military capabilities, espionage capabilities, and their nuclear capabilities.